good. All right, well, it kind of got a little bit quiet. I'll go ahead and seize that opportunity and get us started here. Welcome, everyone. Before we dive in, I wanted to read a passage from Colossians chapter 1 and then open us in prayer. Colossians chapter 1, verses 15. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. Pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you that in Jesus we have hope, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. We place our trust in Jesus, who is the head of this church. Go before us, Lord, as we talk and deliberate as a body. May we relate to one another as family members under the lordship of Jesus. May we have good, frank, hard conversation, all grounded in love. We thank you for your faithfulness, and we thank you that it's not our church, it's not our strategies or willpower that keeps it standing, but it's him who's the firstborn of the living and the dead. And it's in his name that we trust, in his name we pray. Amen. All right, well, thank you, everyone, for being here. Those of you who I may not know, my name is David. I'm an elder here and then the council president. I think it's just a good reminder of how church governance works. And so within our denomination, we have elders and we have deacons. And then the elders and deacons come together, meet once a month, and that makes up council. And council is charged with the common administration of the church. And so council then holds two formal congregational meetings each year. We hold one in June, which is right now, and then one in December. And our meeting today, the primary objective is to deliberate and vote on our church budget. And Colin will talk about the budget here in more detail, but our fiscal year is coming to an end, and we need to vote to approve a budget as a congregation. So we'll spend a good amount of time there. Then we'll also provide updates from each office, deacon updates, elder updates, and then council will provide updates on what we are doing. Just kind of flag where we're going. Within the council updates, I'll pause and we'll have specific time for open forum related to thoughts and feedbacks on a potential executive director position. Then we'll have staff updates, and then there'll be a broader open forum. So there should be opportunities for you to ask questions after every presentation, but any general feedback, if you wouldn't mind saving that for the open forum at the end, and we definitely will, we want to hear from you. So let's view this, we view this as a family meeting, so hopefully it's not too formal and stuffy, and we really do want to hear your opinions. With that, we will get started with the budget presentation. I'll turn that over to Colin. I should mention Colin is chair of the deacons and vice president of council, and an all-around mostly good guy.
Best compliment ever. Yeah, so there's in your handout, if you flip over the front page, the back page, it's kind of a breakdown of this year and the proposed budget for next year. And this is something that you guys will be voting on. You got a Google form for that. In a sense, that helps us determine, yes, this is how we are going to spend our money as a church. And again, your input is important here. There is opportunities to ask questions. Did you want them to ask questions specifically about the budget now or during the open forum? Okay. But I will be very honest. Joe knows this way better than I do, and he's not here. So if you ask me a question I don't know, I'm going to phone a friend, and I'll get back to you. So I'll do my best to help out. But the key thing is you might stand out the most is that first thing of the income. Currently we are at 402,000, and next year we budgeted 314. And some of you might be asking why such a dramatic decrease. The main reason is we, in most years, have just done a balanced budget. We try to get to a zero. And due to lack of, well, because we've gone down in staffing, there hasn't been the need for this amount of income. So we plan for our expenses, basically. So that's why it's such a decrease compared to this previous year and years in the past. Obviously, we can go above that and we will appropriate those funds as needed, but that's where we're standing. So this is kind of what, this is our target goal. Staffing has gone up, and you might be asking, well, you just said we're down staffing, that's where we're going. Cost of living increases has been pretty high, and we're trying to make sure that we take care of our staff here. So there's definitely a bigger jump in cost of living as we try to ensure that with all the inflation going on, that our staff are still taken care of appropriately. Mission, if you look in the top right, is actually broken down into kind of 3 different areas: the external ministry, CRC ministry shares, and benevolence. External ministries are our way of giving to certain organizations, including Ashish, who is just here. Ministry shares are what we give to the Christian Reformed Church that helps with their budget. Every church pledges a certain amount. And then benevolence is when needs arise inside of our church committee, we offer those funds where needed, and they come up here and there. So obviously with benevolence, those things can fluctuate, but we've always been pretty good at maintaining that, the budgetary amount, I guess. Just to keep moving, then again, if you have questions, feel free. Catechesis is going up. Obviously we have more kids. Kelly does a great job. She's trying to flesh things out, provide more opportunities, deeper growth. So we want to give funds appropriately to her so that we can continue to build that out. Building and maintenance, you'll see a big decrease. Some of that is some previous years. The amounts that we paid, COVID kind of messed up when everything was going to actually get done. So everything kind of moved. So our budget kind of got a little moved out of that area in the sense that some of the things that we were going to do earlier, we approved, but then we did them later because of COVID. So then our budget just showed that we used more in that sense. Office, and then interest and other, you'll see a big decrease. The other is, again, some things that got shifted around with COVID. Our ministry shares actually got paid at a different year than what we were going to, so that shows up in a budget. And then also there was just some reconciliation that needed to be done with our books just to make sure everything matched out. And so I would say, I don't know if Joe would say this. Sorry, Joe, I'm gonna say it anyways. He maybe fudged the numbers a little bit just to make sure our budget equaled out. It's not that we actually spent all that money, it's just that we had to, again, try to make sure everything is balanced out and made sense. And we've had several different software systems that we've been using over time, and I think we're getting to the point where we know how they all run, so we had to just kind of move some numbers around to make it all balance out and make sense, both with the bank, QuickBooks, and then our church online giving. So I think that's the main things I wanted to highlight. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Two questions. One, I don't see interest in the new budget.
Interest other.
I know, but it's our interest is about $30,000 a year, so it's not in the new budget.
Calling the lifeline after this. Go ahead.
And remember, it's not an operating expense.
Yep.
Probably why it's not showing here, but we still ends up being cash. And then the second question, what was the cost of living increase that we gave?
5.9%.
Yeah, 5.9.
Based on the Social
Yeah,
Security cost of living for last year.
Thank you. Yes.
Does the amount, like, there's this possibility of hiring a person as staff?
Great question. It is not.
We'll talk about this in the council updates, but yes, the budget is being proposed, we're asking people to vote on does not include that new position. If we did hire that new position from this upcoming fiscal year, there would be a separate meeting that we would vote as a congregation to approve an adjustment to that budget. So what we're asking to vote on today does not include that position. It doesn't mean that we don't think it's important. We'll talk about that a little bit later.
So what was discussed is, kind of just to clarify what he said too, is like we would have to do an amendment budget and you would have to, the congregation would have to re-vote on that. Is that, okay.
This, it says mission expenses decreased due to Ukraine, and I don't know why Ukraine causes mission expenses to decrease.
Yes. So we actually gave more in missions than we were going to budget previously. Our mission expense, we usually try to hit around 10%. So we actually gave $73,000 this year, which is more. Some of that was from giving to other places we wanted to continue. And another part was we gave, I think, up to $10,000 to Ukraine. So it just looks like we gave a lot. So when we're going down in our mission, part of that is like, we're not expecting to continually give $10,000 to Ukraine. So just wanted to make sure the big jump was from that. But good question, yeah.
So to clarify, you're saying that it's not really that we spent 73,000, it's we spent 63,000 last year, and missions, 10,000 was for Ukraine.
Yes, and the congregation really gave a lot more, but obviously they gave through the church, and then we siphoned the funds, but we just want to make sure you guys know where the money went. Yeah.
So I've noticed that the attendance is much less, so I was wondering, has that been increasing our tithing also? So like what's the 70 talking about?
Yes. Short answer, the less people we do have, our tithing has gone down. Enough that at one point in time we were nervous. And then what really helped us out is I feel like we kind of found where the new average was, because that's just something that we had to grasp as deacons and as a council of, what is our current giving amount? Because in previous years, it's always been upwards of 400,000. So going that much lower, it was quite a shock to us, but again, understanding, people have left, and some of the giving has been down. I feel like we know our general trend, and that's important for us for the future of knowing how to budget this out.
So the 15 takes into account that decrease.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
So you say we plan for zero for budgeting total, and that just implies that there's a potential for surplus. Is there a plan or a standard that happens that surplus by the end of the year? Is it, I know some people,
Yeah.
obviously that's what it goes towards, but if there's extra left over, I don't know.
Our usual default is if there is some type of surplus, the mission expense usually gets flexed more. We usually can find, there's plenty of organizations that we've been connected with. With deacons, a lot of the time, we get towards the end of the year, like June, and we look at our mission budget and we go, okay, we've met it, but we still have extra. We then make another round with some of those. But I do think that's also a great opportunity for the congregation, is if they have ideas of what could we use this money for, talk to David, talk to me, talk to anyone on council, because there definitely are times where we do have a surplus, and we would love to give it away, in a way. Yeah.
How much left do we have on the building? Well, because sometimes we paid off some of the building.
Mm-hmm. It's true, I don't. So I'm writing these texts down to Joe as we speak. Oh, Joe did say, I have an answer. Thank you, Joe. Interest was $2,000 last year. Makes no sense to you? Doesn't make sense to me. That's why I have Joe. And then, sorry, what was your question? Because I don't know if you can hear it. How much do we have left on the building? We'll see if he sends one through. This is a great game, by the way. Just have somebody else answer all these questions. Any other questions? So, Kelly, am I right in saying that the budget has already been sent out as a Google form?
Yes.
Somebody will tell you what to do about the voting on that after this. One last thing before you come up is also from the Personnel Committee, I just want to put a face with a name. Sandra, can you just raise a hand or even stand up? This is Sandra. She's been, and her husband have been stopping by, and they're here for the summer, spring. And Sandra has graciously offered to help clean our church. Randy was our main janitorial, and he found another job, and she is stepping in to fill the gap. And so, obviously, yes. This was huge, as it now has allowed Chris and Kelly to not have to clean the church after services. So again, if you're ever using the church, obviously Sandra's here to help clean up, but one just extra little push is if you are here using it, try to clean up as much as you can. Her job is to kind of tidy things up and make sure it's ready. But if you're ever using the church and the facilities, your own dishes and stuff like that, wash them up. That's just a little plug from the council and the deacons. Thanks.
I'm going to share the elder update. I'm an elder at the church right now. I'm also a staff member, so right now I'm wearing my elder hat. Later I'll give a staff update as a staff member. So the elders, some of the major things that we've been working through in the last several months since we last met. A big part that we talk about each meeting is our community groups. We had a leaders meeting this spring to try to figure out and best identify how do we continue to support and encourage and equip the leaders of the community groups. And then we spend a little bit of time each meeting kind of checking in on how the groups are doing and what we hear from the leaders. And those are really a great mechanism for community building and also for pastoral and community care, because a lot of times that's where we hear about and know about care needs that arise, or that's one of the ways that we hear about that. We are looking to have a membership class coming up. If you remember, we haven't had one since before COVID. Just before COVID we had one. And so we haven't had one since. Partly it's been just what the needs, and partly it's been a logistical thing trying to figure out how to fit that in with other things going on too. But we're looking to potentially have one in October. And that's one thing that Chris is going to kind of be evaluating this in the format over the summer a little bit. We were really encouraged this past year. We participated in a STOT fellowship, and one portion of that STOT fellowship were a couple of lectures that we did. And we felt like they were really great, both as learning opportunities and as well as intergenerational gatherings, having a meal together and having opportunities for the kids to participate in things as well. So we're looking at continuing this practice next year with a lecture in the fall and one in the spring around different topics of interest. We haven't landed on anything for sure yet, but just know that that's a hope. It wouldn't be tied to like a fellowship this year, but we felt like it was a really wonderful opportunity for us internally, and also a great opportunity to invite other people from the community to learn and to fellowship with us. So also, if as a note on the budget, when you see that jump in the catechesis number, that's part of that, because the catechesis number includes both children's catechesis and adult catechesis, and so we budgeted some extra money in there to be able to accommodate those. Like this past year, those lectures and the food were all covered through the fellowship. So now, in order to continue those, we have to kind of put them into our budget. So that's why they're part of the reason why that increase is there as well. And then we also want to just remind you about the cycle of office bearers. David touched a little, reminding us of the governance of the church. Just as a reminder, coming in September, you'll get more information around nominating elders and deacons. We serve a 3-year term, and so we try our best to kind of stagger so that we don't all come off or all come on at the same time. But, this year, the people ending the 3-year term, it doesn't end until December, but we'll start kind of the nomination process in September. And so there'll be 3 elders that are scheduled to come off and 1 deacon that is scheduled to come off. So just putting that out there as a reminder to you, both in terms of who you can identify as leaders, and paying attention to whether that is a good role or fit for you if you were to get nominated. That's how the system works, right? The congregation nominates people, those names are presented to council, and then voted on by the congregation. So I just wanted to give you a heads up that that's coming in September, and that it's good to start thinking about what leadership within our church looks like, both in those more formal capacities and as well as informal capacities. So, any elder update questions? Okay. And then I believe Tyler is doing a deacon update.
Hello. So I'm going to provide an update that goes back a little bit to the start of 2020 or 2022, not that far back, because I feel like we hadn't had a chance to sit down as a congregation a lot with the last update that we had. If I miss anything on this one, Colin or James, feel free to jump in. But on the deacon update, I was one of 3 new deacons that came on in January. And one of the first tasks, at least for us, having coming in from the outside, was really onboarding, understanding the role of the deacons, our role within the council. Colin, Heidi, Anthony did a great job of bringing us on. Colin doing some extra work, especially on the deacon handbook updates, and really bringing us up to speed, and we appreciated the leadership from David and others on that as we came on. But at that time, or shortly thereafter, we determined it made sense moving forward to kind of have focus areas within the diaconate for different areas that individuals would focus on and use some of our strengths and our times most accordingly. I'll go over some of those focus areas and may mention the deacons that were especially involved in those. So one area is in benevolence, and that's care for the physical needs of the congregation. Typically we do this in response to requests. So a benevolence form comes in, deacons would review that and then correspond with the person who made that request regarding that need. We also, from time to time, identify benevolence needs in other ways as they arise in the congregation. And these can be for basic things like the need for food, for shelter, utilities, folks that are in job transitions or housing transitions, and also just small things that come up. We've had more people coming into our church building in the last months with people with different needs. And one of our efforts on the benevolence side has been restocking the benevolence pantry or getting that going. We've had a lot of help and assistance from the congregation in bringing things out to the box that's been in the lobby, and that's looking great. That gives us something that we can give in terms of meeting a physical need for those basic necessities, toiletries, food items, or water that people come for or could use when they visit. On the mercy side of things, that's where we really tie in our focus area as deacons on our external ministry partners. Colin mentioned some of these with the budget update. We partner with several organizations here in Milwaukee, but also several worldwide, including Partners India and others. And one of the things that we do as deacons is discern where we can support those ministries and at what level, accounting for approximately 10% of our budget as we've committed to. This year, we did have a couple of interesting scenarios with the gift for the Ukrainian refugees being a special offering that we participated in. But also a role on the deacon side for the external ministries has been highlighting those opportunities. So often the coordination that happens behind the scenes on having a partner come and speak, or in updating communications, or working with Kelly or the staff to get those into the bulletin about our ministry partners, or having them come to CRC, is also a role that the deacons play on the Mercy side. Additionally, stewardship has been a big role with regard to our work, the budget being the main focus area in the start of the year. We have a role in making sure that we're responsible for using the gifts that God has given this congregation, and we try to do so humbly and thoughtfully. The budget preparation this year was a little bit of a challenge, knowing that giving levels were off a little bit. As Colin mentioned, there was a lot to do also to clean up some of the financials, and Joe was our big leader on that. Additionally, a role that deacons play is keeping an eye on our campus here, making sure our building and operations continue to function. I had no idea how much work was done behind the scenes until I got the opportunity to come in and serve in this deacon role. But the amount of work that the deacons did on that, also the other council, and especially the staff, as we went through some transitions and we had some openings at the staffing levels this year, was significant. That's to keep the day-to-day bills and operations and printing and cleaning and all of those things that maybe hadn't been quite established at the start of the year. To keep those going has been a big pull this year. And also James for being on task to respond to any issues that we've had with the alarm systems or the doors. With anything that goes on wrong or right in the building, he's there with it. Shoveling snow, whenever anything is broken, there is somebody that has to get that going and then make sure that the bills are paid on those. The deacons have played a role in that along with the staff. Also this year, we have tried to focus a little bit more on creating some communications to update what's going on with the council. So the quarterly update, and we'll try to do more as well to communicate and work with the staff to get updates into our bulletins, into our electronic communications as well. And finally, Colin mentioned this a little bit, but a role that a number of the deacons have played is serving on the personnel committee. And so what we've done there is try to address first that the needs of our current staff, the concerns of our current staff are being heard, that those needs are being met. And we did interviews and evaluations. We did surveys that many of you participated in, and we appreciate that. But we've been able to frame both a compensation policy and also opportunities to get more feedback from staff throughout the year based on what we've heard from staff and from the congregation. And so moving forward, we're going to want to make sure that we are getting that feedback to staff, from supervisors and from council, and the other way, that we're able to, on a monthly or more regular basis, get feedback about how things are going and make sure that any concerns that they have are being voiced and heard by us throughout the year. See if I forgot anything else here. I think I got everything on my list. Colin, did I miss anything? All right, any questions? Yeah.
I've been wondering how our church's relationship with the city of Milwaukee, the Brady Street Association, and the Brady Street Bid have been going, if at all.
Yeah.
Somebody at home asked, can you repeat the question into the microphone?
So you were wondering about how CRC's relationship with the city of Milwaukee, you said the Brady Street Bid, and you mentioned one other organization, sorry.
Brady Street Association, Neighborhood Association.
The Brady Street Neighborhood Association, how that's going. I'll say that in the start of this year, we did not focus a lot on those neighborhood organizations. And part of it is we were trying to get our hands on all of the operational issues that we had. But I think you bring up a good point, is there's a little bit more freedom now in terms of the deacons' focus going into the second half of the year with the budget hopefully coming to a conclusion, that we'd have more time to connect with the neighborhood and be intentional about that. But I'll say we haven't done a lot of connection and outreach on that front yet. Anything else? Okay.
All right. Thanks, Tyler and Kelly. Spend some time now talking about council updates. So as I mentioned, two offices. Elders are primarily focused, to distill it down, on oversight of the spiritual life and doctrine of the church. Deacons are responsible for promoting stewardship and justice within our community and outside of it. And then the two groups come together to form council, and council is responsible for the common administration of the church. And so we meet, elders and deacons together as council, once a month. And at the beginning of the year, we came up with kind of 4 goals to guide council throughout the year. I just wanted to mention those and provide an update on it. And some of it has already been mentioned. But the first was to build upon HR systems and processes. And the primary way we've gotten at this was forming a personnel committee, which Tyler referenced. And so that's been chaired by Colin, who's the vice president of council. And that personnel committee consists of Colin, Elder Ben Verholst, deacons Tyler and Heidi. And they put a lot of work into basically, I'd say, revamping and in many cases putting in and creating entirely new review processes for our staff, creating surveys to get input from the congregation as far as the temperature of the church and improvements that we can make. A new compensation policy was put in place. Those things are detailed in the sheet that you've been given. But the personnel committee is really worked hard, and I think it's just the first step in hopefully improving our systems and processes from an HR standpoint. Another goal for this year was to clarify our criteria for evaluating mission opportunities, and this kind of gets at helping to better clarify and communicate our mission as a church. And the first thing we did was that February or March? I can't remember. We took a council retreat at the Urban Ecology Center, spent an entire day there, really focused just on mission. So Chris taught on mission. We reflected, we did an inventory on all of the organizations that we're aware of that members of the congregation are connected with, and we started to distill that down into some like 3 or 4 areas that of priority. And so you'll be hearing more about this. The deacons are doing a really good job of highlighting some of these areas. But that was step 1, and we'll hopefully have some time this summer to continue to debrief on that as we get out of the budget phase and continue to drill down on the mission piece and make sure that we are highlighting opportunities for all of us to participate together, and also making sure that there's more of an open lines of communication so that we're hearing from you all, Joyce, like, hey, Bray Street bid. Let's get involved. Great. Like, we need to be better and more proactive about creating opportunities for you guys to share those things with us. That leads me to the third kind of goal for council this year, and that was improving communication overall. We just want to create more natural touch points. And that means instead of so of 2 formal meetings, June and December, and then we want to host 2 other luncheons and more semi-formal updates. So we did one in February, I believe, and then we'll have another one in September. So we'll have lunch together. There'll be an opportunity to provide an update from council and for you guys to ask questions. And then the sheet that you guys have, shout out to Tyler. He's really been driving this, and so huge thanks to Tyler for really helping us to, I think, hopefully better communicate with you all. The last goal, and we're going to spend a little bit more time here, is evaluating and creating a process and procedure for considering a potential executive director position. So I'm going to back up and explain how we got here. So permit me about 5 minutes maybe of background, and then explain where we're the plan to go forward. And then we're going to pause and have open forum around this point in particular, because we really want your feedback. How we got here. You guys may remember at this meeting last year in June, we shared with you results from a consultation report that we received from the denominations called Pastor Church Resources. And they basically came alongside of us as we, as a church, came out of a really difficult time. COVID for sure, but obviously internally with our changes in staffing. They helped us look at the current culture and climate of our church and what improvements we might be able to make. And a big takeaway from that was they observed that we were pretty typical with other churches our age, around 7 years old or so. They say that they often see a church struggling to shift from a church planter-led model or church to a council-led church. And they felt like we were very much stuck in that phase. Council, that resonated with council, and we certainly saw that to be true. We then had put out some surveys, basically a 3-level survey. We surveyed the congregation a year or so ago around the health and life of CRC. We surveyed council members on that, and then we surveyed our staff members. And what became clear out of that survey was, and this kind of ties into what PCR had put their finger on, the need to for perhaps council to take on more, but also to free Chris up to focus on his areas of strength, and which is preaching, pastoring, and praying. And so we wanted to make that a focus area for him. And then some areas within his job description that are technically in his job description, which maybe aren't areas of strength, and he doesn't frankly have the bandwidth. And that's a lot to do with like the day-to-day operation of the church. So we identified the day-to-day operation and management of the church as a need. And that means ministry development. So, to the extent that a relationship with Brady Street is identified, and that's important. The deacons only have so much bandwidth and can only do so much to make that happen. So short of someone in the congregation raising their hand saying, I'm going to be the point person, I'm going to put in all the hours to make that happen, it often can fall by the wayside. Facility management, which we've talked about a little bit, and then staff development and management as well. So really a point person on the day-to-day operations of the church is the need that council saw. And we, our attempt at getting at that need is a potential executive director or pastor position. And so we presented this to the congregation, at least a first draft of the job description at our December meeting, and did not ask for feedback, and the feedback was positive. We did not hear anyone express, there was helpful feedback around the job description per se, but not necessarily that it was not a need. And so we, as a council, then have been working since then to further this process as we discern whether or not this is a position that we should be looking to hire. And so what we've done since December and now is we formed a search process committee that I chaired, Elder Tom Kepler, and then Deacon Joe were a part of as well. And so the job description that you see in front of you, it hasn't changed dramatically, but that is the current form based on our committee work. And then we took a look at some budget implications and also some search process criteria. If we do go down this road, if we get to the point of posting this job, what a search committee could possibly look like. At the end of the day, though, the reality is, per the budget presentation, we're down numbers, we're down in giving, and so to support a full-time executive director or pastor position would require the church to step up. And so we're trying to discern the timing on this. And by all means, we're also looking for feedback on, are we off base here? Do people feel like this is a need in and of itself? But we're trying to discern really the temperature of the congregation right now and when would it be appropriate to move forward with this position. So the primary way we're trying to gauge the temperature is through the survey, and hopefully you've seen emails come out. Thank you to those of you, there have been many in this room who have responded to that. It's extremely helpful and important feedback to us. In a moment here, I guess the second way we're going to gauge the temperature is to have a frank conversation here in this room. And so we'll do that here in a second. But I just wanted to, first plug the survey. If you have not filled that out, if you'd be willing to do so, we'd really appreciate it. Okay, so before we kind of have an open forum around this issue, I want to, I guess, preemptively address a few concerns or feedback that have been raised to the survey. I should be clear that by far and away, a majority of respondents so far recognize the need, and people seem willing to potentially give more to support it. However, there have been some really great helpful feedback and concerns have been raised. And I want to acknowledge those just so you know that we're hearing it, and we can talk about these in more detail, but I want to address four issues, provide not a rebuttal, putting on my lawyer hat again, but just to acknowledge that these are out there, and then we'll open it up to forum, and we can either talk about these issues or others that you may see. The first is the job description itself. It reads like two jobs. It's too broad and vague, and I think that's an appropriate. It's appropriate. And frankly, my guess is coming out of this, we will go back to the drawing board and tweak that job description. So thank you for that feedback. I should say that we did not just pull out the job description out of thin air. This is based on, I believe, 4 actual church executive pastor positions. And so these are real jobs that are out there. Tom Kepler has a friend who's very involved in this, in hiring and in this world, and his take was based on the size of our church, it is an appropriate scope. It is not more than one person could fill. All that to be said, though, the feedback we've received really, I think, is going to be helpful as we realize that perhaps we need to revisit the scope and magnitude of the job description. A second, I don't know if it's concern or feedback, is our church is too small for this position right now. And granted, we're down members, and certainly it's great to see new faces in here, but we're not necessarily growing. But we want to be in a position where we can grow. And so I think we don't want to wait until we're in a crisis mode before we get ahead of this thing. And frankly, this is just more coming from the council side. Council has stepped it up, as Tyler talked about, into more the day-to-day aspects of the church. And we're concerned about that being a sustainable model going forward. It is a lot of work, and we could use more horsepower there. So we don't want to wait until there's a fire before we act. But certainly understand that how it does appear, and that we are small. A third thing we heard a couple times, our past experience should cause us to pause before we bring on another staff member, particularly if it's a pastor. And I think part of this is we're still in the healing process. Part of it is, have we learned from the past? And completely get that. I think just to be clear, the way the job description, the title is written the way it is, we are looking for someone with administrative capability first and foremost. Ideally, it would be a pastor who is administratively gifted, but the worst case scenario is we hire a pastor who we hope has administrative competence. And so we do not want to find someone who overlaps and shares Chris's giftings. And so we're aware of obviously the past and perhaps some of us being gun shy about bringing someone on, but we're really looking for someone with a core skill set that complements Chris and the other staff. We're not looking to hire another, that's why we haven't called it an associate pastor, although some people may say this is actually an associate pastor job. That's fine. We just want to get across the main role for this job is administrative and day-to-day operations and focus. Finally, and then I'll stop talking, there are things we should be doing, folks have raised this, there are things that we can or should do now before we take this step. We should better define our mission and what we're about as a church before we bring on someone who's expected to execute that on a daily basis. We should look at bringing someone on a part-time basis first, and then look full-time. I believe there might have been a couple other things, but those points are well taken, and we appreciate that feedback. So where are we going? And I'll open it up. Like we mentioned, you're voting on a budget today that does not assume this position. If we decide that within this fiscal year, we discern that we should move forward with hiring a full-time position, there would be a separate meeting to amend the budget. So basically, it would be another opportunity for the congregation to basically give voice to whether or not we should be going in this direction. Our goal is at our September quarterly update meeting to provide better clarification on where we think we need to go. So that would either take the form of voting to amend the budget for this position, or we would provide alternative solutions that we've identified in order to maintain or grow the status quo here. So our goal is to take your feedback from the surveys and today, process it as a council this summer, and come back to you in September with kind of what we're thinking the direction will be. All right, I apologize for talking way too much. All that to be said, I want to provide open forum right now. We'll have a general open forum later, but right now let's keep it specific to this potential position or the need more generally. It can either be phrased in the form of a question, or it can just feedback or opinion, totally fine, either way.
You have some ideas of the authority structure. Are they under the current senior pastor, or are they both under council? I'm a little concerned about that being unclear.
Yeah, thanks, John. And that was something, I think Alan brought that up at the last meeting, and that was the main thing we deliberated as a search process committee, and came to the conclusion that this individual should report to the senior pastor. And so the way the job description reads right now, this individual will report to the senior pastor.
I suppose I'm not sure this is really a question, but maybe just an encouragement of, I think, if I recall correctly, pre-COVID, when we were literally considering other spaces because we'd filled our capacity here, there was a need, and Chris felt stretched thin in pastoral care in particular. And although that might not be the case now, this is a position that will hopefully be with us for well into the future. You can see where I'm going. My own personal opinion is that you should consider a pastor strongly, but just and not leave. I don't love the idea of going into the search with the either or mentality, because I think it might encourage decision making around short-term needs that don't necessarily fully encompass what long-term needs will be. So just to really think 5 years down the line, what capacity would best support the continued growth of the church, and then stick to that one thing as this job description, whether it's pastoral or not. But don't leave it open, because I think depending on candidate quality, how quickly you get candidates, how quickly you want to fill the position, short-term decision-making might not necessarily be in the interest of long-term.
It's a great point. Thank you.
Just to piggyback off that comments and question, I would be curious to clarify. So I see in the title, executive director / pastor, and I get that there's a distinction there, or a question about who might be hired. But if it is a pastor, I think that role needs to be specifically clarified. Is it an executive pastor and an executive director? Is it, I know you're not looking for an associate pastor, but to just clarify the relationship between Chris and that pastor in terms of pastoral seniority from a title perspective.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. That's a good point. And the slash is really to communicate what is Paul's concern, is that we be looking for someone with administrative competence, preferably a pastor. In that case, it would be, the title would be executive pastor. If not ordained, then we would be open to hiring an executive director. So if it is a pastor, it would be executive pastor. In either case, the intent right now is for that individual to report to Chris. But understand, if it is a pastor, while we think that is preferable, there would need to be more detail in the pastoral job description portion to make sure that there's clarity around who's doing what on the pastor end. So thank you.
For this thought, I think we're talking about growth deeper, which is implied through the ministry piece, and growth in terms of just a larger congregation. There's some potential to serve more people. There's needs in the city that are opportunity that God would use us to touch. And with that, I also heard a nice statement you said, David, is transitions. And transitions can be places where you get stuck and places you can push through. And I think we are exactly that church. You know, we're still at the first 7 years. What did you call that?
Church planter.
The church planter phase, right? And so, yeah, I just want to affirm the work that's been going on, that this is the kind of position that provides the capacity and the support to really move forward and move us beyond caring for what we do well, but then building on it. Again, building it deeper in terms of being able to do ministry on a you know, with more opportunities and more possibilities, and I think those have been identified in the just job description, but also to be able to serve better. And I think growth, while on the one hand churches can sit back and wait for growth to happen, sometimes that'll happen in a community where there's like a lot of demographic growth, or, you know, and people are just looking for it. But the other way growth happens is there's an intentional choice to welcome and facilitate it. And I think that's what this position does. And so I just want to affirm that this position is probably one of the most significant decisions I think I've seen in our conversation as a church, because it really can move us to a next chapter in what is a really good story. even with its ups and downs. It had a down, okay, fine. But I think we're moving to the next chapter. It'll be a good part of the story. So just want to encourage you to keep moving forward, and also not get stuck in the decision-making process. And September's still a little ways off, okay? But just keep moving forward. And last thought I want to add is, this issue of funding is a function a bit of faith and a bit of what comes first. And do you wait for the funding in order to make the move? Or is it a both and? I would really suggest to you it's a both and. I think it's a step of faith. I think your numbers in your finances show there is capacity for giving, but haven't made that case in the past that well. And I think by serving people, by doing more, by providing some program opportunities, by freeing Chris is a big one, to use his gifts well, that will bring people, with that will come their support. And I think the support will flow as the ministry of the church grows, deepens, and impacts more lives. It'll just, more people will flow behind that. And with that, the funding will flow right behind it too. So,
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate it. It's Joyce. We are, Tyler is taking minutes, so this is getting taken down.
I would like to bounce off of what Paul said before, with on the one hand, but on the other hand, kind of a comment. On the one hand, I think it's really important to do the long-term thinking rather than short-term thinking on this position. On the other hand, I think in order to do that, leaving the position a little bit more open might actually be a better strategy for accomplishing hiring for the long term rather than the short term. Because if you get the right person, I mean, it's better to fill it with the right person than to fill it with like the wrong person who fits a narrow description, in my view. So at least consider keeping it open for the very purpose of making it a long-term hire.
Thanks, Joyce.
I was just curious, where do pastors, like executive pastors, directors come from? Do they, like when
Fall out of the sky.
oh dear Lord. No, but I like when a person decides, oh, I want to go be a pastor, do they go to Calvin and then they decide, oh, I'm gonna be like, Pastor Chris, where I speak and spiritual things, and then are there like other career paths where they go the executive director, or do they all go one path and then one guy goes to a church and they do more of the executive thing? Do we get one? Where do they come from? Where do they get these skills and experience? I'm curious.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Good question. I'm sure there's others who can answer that better than me, but in my experience, so if you're talking about a pastor, yes, they're going to seminary. Within our denomination, a lot of that's coming out of Calvin. And so there's some, I'm aware of some younger, whether you want to call them associate or executive pastors, who really do not aspire necessarily to be a senior pastor, but enjoy being in the mix pastorally and providing support and being that number two to the senior pastor. This is usually, from my experience in larger churches, where you have like an executive director, where maybe it's someone, it's perhaps a second career, but they've run a ministry organization for a number of years and are looking to serve in a local church, and they're very administratively gifted, and but not necessarily ordained as a pastor. I know there are lots of other examples out there, but for us, like, we would start probably, again, right now, council's preference is for it to be an administratively gifted pastor. So you'd probably obviously start with Calvin Seminary and others, but would certainly, to the extent that we stick with keeping it open of the job description, we would look other places as well. So I don't know if that answers your question, but they are out there.
Hi. So Rita Gremmer, is she with the administrative portion of this position? Is this to replace her and she's temporary, or is this in addition to her and she's a permanent fixture?
Right. No, thanks, Kelly. That's a great question. I meant to bring that up before. So when we proposed this position and expressed the need for it, Abby was still in her role, and we thought she was still going to be in that role. So this is not in. This is an addition to the administrative assistant role. So it doesn't replace it, and frankly, we were even at, we felt like this need existed even when that position was being filled. So
How is it going to be decided how those different jobs are divided up when it comes down to the day-to-day nitty-gritty things?
Yeah, good question. I don't know that I have like a definitive answer for you today, but I think there needs to be someone still has to quarterback that process. Someone has to also be overseeing and helping Rita and others and be that point person. So whoever, whether or not person A or person B is the one executing a specific task, it still takes someone to be the point person and quarterback that process. And I think Chris has shared this. His strength is not in, if you want to call it like executive, leadership, and it's not an area that he feels strong in. And so someone needs to be responsible for being the quarterback there, and council doesn't feel like we can do it on our own. So it doesn't answer your question as far as like the nitty gritty. And again, it goes back to we're still a very small church. So how many tasks really need to be completed? But again, we're thinking more like Alan expressed it. Like it's one thing to block and tackle and execute on our limited operations as they exist right now. We're barely, from council's perspective, we're barely treading water on that as it is. It's been expressed by the church, and we feel that we want to not just maintain status quo, we want to grow. And so I think it's just a strategic, position. Go ahead, Kelly.
So I'm just foreseeing possible confusion. Maybe it doesn't matter at this point, but in the past, so say we had Abby and she would have an idea and say to Chris, I have this idea, and Chris was like, yeah, go do that. So if there's this other person, so say Rita wants to do something administratively, and then she asks this other person who can say okay, but he or she reports to Chris, so then that person has to go to Chris. So like Chris still has to, if he's sort of the head honcho, has to say, yeah, that's fine, or can this other person say, yeah, that's fine? It seems like there's some layers there that might be confusing. They obviously are not going to be worked out now, but
Yeah.
I'm just seeing confusion.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Interwebs. Says it's a comment, not a question. Preston, I'm just going to tell you it's Preston. I fully support a hire with administrative gifts for the reasons that multiple people spoke to, but even though our church is small, we will need the new hire to engage with the congregation pastorally. We can't expect Chris to shoulder the entire pastoral responsibility, particularly as we anticipate growth, but both numerically, but also in terms of discipleship. And I would add to what David said around Kelly's comment. I think part of it has to do probably with the scope of what is brought up, because I think sometimes it even exists in the current structure, right? When I suggest something to Chris, sometimes he can give me an answer, and sometimes he says, bring that to council. And so I think it probably depends on the scope of that type of ask or suggestion or request.
Any other questions, feedback? Right, so this won't be the only opportunity. Feel free to reach out to me directly if you would prefer, and I'm happy to sit down and talk too if you would like to have a one-on-one conversation. If you haven't done so, again, big plug to please fill out the survey. That's going to be a really important piece of data that we look at over the next coming months. And yeah, expect an update with kind of a clear direction from us in September. Yeah, Meredith.
This is just for future thinking. If we did a full-time person, what kind of cost would that be for salary plus benefits?
Yeah, it's a good question. So just to spitball, including benefits, full-time, we were thinking around 80 as just kind of a benchmark. That is not in stone, but that's, as far as when we think about that, when we mention a 25% increase in giving, that's what we're assuming.
And then, I don't know how easy it would be to find this person, but can you find them part-time, or are they pretty much only
I think I'm aware of it having worked on a part-time basis. I don't know how common it is, but it's certainly something that we would consider. It's been brought up in the surveys as well, so that'll be an option that we discuss as a council.
I think it'll be hard to bring someone plus or minus family, especially if they're from out of town, for a part-time job. Just saying.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate the feedback. This is, a decision obviously we're not taking lightly. We feel a sense of urgency too. So we'll continue to move forward and bring kind of our current thinking and decision in September. In the meantime, please fill out the survey. Reach out to anyone on council if you'd like to meet and talk. We really do value the feedback. Okay, we'll have a general open forum at the end, but before that, Kelly is going to provide a staff update. Obviously, our pastor is surfing the waves right now, but Kelly will provide the update for us.
Try to fill you a little in on Chris, but it'll probably be kids heavy since that's what I do. So children's programming is done for the year. We do continue nursery through the summer. So this summer is kind of spent planning and building for next year so that we can be ready come fall for our needs for teachers and curriculum and all of those things. This past spring, we did add a middle school, high school catechism class, as well as formalizing the profession of faith process. And we're continuing to think through what faith formation does look like in that age range as we have a growing number, but still not a huge number, right? Obviously, right now it's more heavy in the younger kids. But we're starting to think and plan through what that looks like for us as a church. And then also supporting faith formation through our programs, but also through other means, like the intergenerational events, like the STOT and the Advent gatherings and the Theology of the Body event. And then how we figure out how to support faith formation at home and building up our community groups to be a place that are for kids as well. And how do we integrate them into the life of the church through those groups? Coming up starting this summer, a little bit later this month, I'm joining a cohort of 4 other churches that have a grant to explore what sacred play looks like. So you'll hear more about that. The first section kind of is the learning phase. So through the summer, we'll kind of learn together about what that means, and then explore some projects in the fall and then in the spring around sacred play. Also, as was mentioned, we do have a new administrative assistant, Rita. She's typically in church on Wednesdays and Friday mornings. So if you happen to stop by around then, you might see her. It is Heidi's mom, Heidi Gremmer's mom. And she's been a wonderful addition, especially taking up some of what the deacons had to take up when Abby left, so a lot of that. We're still navigating and figuring out what makes sense for her to do because she's not a member of our church. She attends a different church, and so that role isn't going to look exactly like it did with Abby, who knew all of you and knew who to tap on shoulders for and was here for lunches and all of that kind of stuff. So we're still navigating that a little bit. Ben Verhulst right now is at Synod, which is our denomination's annual gathering. So you can be in prayer for that. There's a lot of big decision making that's happening, particularly because it was canceled for the last 2 years because of COVID. So there's kind of this buildup of all sorts of things they have to figure out together. So you can be in prayer for him. He's a delegate to Synod. When he returns is when he'll start his internship with the church. And you should have seen an email about that and some of his responsibilities. So you'll see him preaching a lot more. And so with that, it kind of changes Chris's role a little bit. He'll, of course, oversee and support and mentor Ben in his internship, but then also some of his goals that he's expressed to us as elders is to try to do more church-wide eating and drinking events throughout the summer. You shouldn't be probably surprised by that. He's going to be kind of re-looking at the membership process, whether kind of the classes that he has done previously, whether we should kind of stick with that model or how he could kind of create discussion groups and structure that maybe a little bit differently. And then also he's, for a while, kind of wanted to dive more into a leadership training curriculum on how do we raise up leaders within the church and support their formation. And also training for whether it's a formal leadership position like an elder or a deacon, or more informal in providing just pastoral care to your fellow congregants. And then also beginning his sermon planning for the coming year. And then there's a book project that he's working on, I'm told. So that's what I have for you for staff updates. Any questions related to that? And or we can probably jump towards open forum too.
What does book project mean?
He's doing a writing project, writing a book, but I don't know all of the details.
So, Kelly, one of the things I most enjoyed about the church I grew up in is that they had a very dynamic middle school and high school group, and they met weekly, but they also did activities during the summer and mission trips and things like that. Obviously, we're a much smaller scale than the church I grew up in, but have we thought about doing anything like that for our young adults?
Yeah, and so in the fall, council had a retreat as well, and one of the topics that we talked about was related to youth group and what we want that to look like. So there is a hope and a plan to have what you might think of as a traditional youth group program. Part of it is figuring out timing, right, as far as like when there's kind of a critical mass for that age range, and also, do we do it as an individual church? Do we try to partner with another church when we don't have that critical mass? So some of those things that we're still trying to weigh. I think that is our ultimate hope. It's just kind of waiting for timing.
I agree. You know, you need a critical mass to have things, and it's hard to mix middle schoolers with high schoolers. They're very different. But have we thought about a quarterly event where they go out to some camp or youth group where they spend time, bonding?
Yeah.
That might be easier to do with a smaller number of people.
Right. Yeah. That's good. A good perspective. We did a few, not like overnight events, but a few events pre-COVID, but then haven't kind of returned to some of those for a variety of reasons.
I have two related questions to that. One of the reasons, we may be weird in this, but one of the reasons we were very attracted to CRC is that it did not have a traditional youth group, because those can be very unpleasant, actually. And
That's okay, Joyce. I got thrown out of church camp, so I do understand.
Personally, I've been okay, but like just seeing what else is out there as far as church youth groups is like, I don't want our kids to be part of those things. So I plead for it to be not your traditional youth group. Second thing is, many or most of the churches I've ever been to before this have had an all-church retreat before, and we've never had one. And I'm wondering whether that's out of the question or something we would consider, or what?
Yeah, we did talk about it a little bit, I don't know, maybe it was about a year ago now, whether that would be a feasible thing. I think in the interim, they've planned, the deacons worked to plan a camping trip both last fall and coming up this fall, I think in September. And so again, camping is not everybody's cup of tea, but I think that's kind of maybe a stepping stone towards what it might look like, but that's a good suggestion. So.
For those of us with complex schedules, you're planning to let us know a couple months in advance, since that needs to be on my schedule 3 months in advance?
Yes, I don't know the date off the top of my head, but I know there's a flyer in that area that has the date on it. It's September something. 23 and 24. There you go. And I believe at Kohler Andre.
Just putting in your idea for a deacon.
So maybe we're already there now, but open forum. So anything that's on your guys' minds, thoughts, suggestions, questions, now would be the time. So we'll take a couple minutes. If there's nothing, that's totally fine, but feel free to share. And I'm okay with awkward silence, so.
In the proposed budget, which we're going to vote online, I assume, it doesn't, as far as I can tell, the tithes are not the projected tithes, but enough tithes to make the budget go to zero. And so there may be already sort of built in some sort of surplus of projected tithes, and that could be, is that anticipated to be part of what, if we needed to, an extra 80,000 or so for another position, could that move towards that? So to me, 25% seems more than, maybe I'm just not doing the numbers right, but it's.
Yeah, do you want me to attempt to answer this, or?
Well, I would just say, yeah, it's kind of a two-part thing. I think we do have money in the bank. Like, that's point number one. And then number two, that was just a number that I think got the council to a point of, if people were to say that they could give up to X amount, that would be a step in the right direction based on what we do have in the bank as well.
A reminder about voting. So if you are a member of the church, each individual member can vote. It's not like a household thing. So the link was sent out. It's a short Google form. And if we don't have an adequate number of votes, you'll probably get a friendly reminder email at the beginning of the week. So.
Anything else?
I haven't fully formulated this question, but I was thinking about the example that Joyce and you were talking about earlier about if we had a position filled and this person would be out working in the neighborhood, if we thought that communicating more with our neighborhood and Brady Street and just the people in Milwaukee was part of our vision going forward. How different is this position if it were more pastoral than the previous associate pastor position we had? I don't know. I'm just wondering, comparison-wise.
Yeah, it's a good question. I would just say that previously we had two individuals who, from their giftings and temperament and skill set, aspired to be senior pastors. And so I think that's a big difference. Not that this individual who we hire couldn't become a senior pastor one day, but I think council's perspective, their skills overlapped more than, and I'd say in the administration side of things, there wasn't a whole lot of common skills there. So it's a great question. It's something that we've discussed, and I don't know that it necessarily comes across. If you were to look at the two job descriptions, they would be different. There would certainly be overlap there, but I think in reality, when the rubber met the road, different jobs were being performed. So that's not a satisfactory answer. It's on the radar, but it's kind of a key point as if we move forward in trying to find someone as far as who exactly we're looking for.
Around. Okay, so as a follow-up to that, how heavily do you anticipate you would weigh a background in strategic planning or administrative skill sets over pastoral?
Yeah, and I guess I should start here. It would not be my decision or even council's decision. So as part of, I haven't even gone into the details on this because we don't know when and if we're going to go forward. But most likely there's going to be a search committee that's formed that includes a couple council members, maybe 3 council members and at least 2 congregational members. So that search committee certainly will provide some guidance from council around some of these questions, but it's not going to be me or council ultimately who makes that call. So we'd be looking to invite you into this process in the form of a search committee if we move forward to help answer some of these types of questions. So at this point, we've identified the need. We're trying to, based on your feedback, clean up the job description as best as we can to provide, so if we do decide to post a job, the search committee is informed and they have the tools that they need. And we're trying to discern the best timing to do that based on our budget constraints. So that's kind of where we're at. I know it's a lot, and I feel like this is something that we've been thinking about a lot, and so it's very easy for us to just assume certain things, and you guys hear it in a couple meetings, and hopefully we're doing better with our email communication. But all that to be said, like, as you continue to think about this and you have thoughts or questions, please do not hesitate to reach out, obviously through the form, but for in-person meetings as well. We really want the input. We want this to be a family decision. Council you guys entrust us to make decisions, and we have to set a direction, but we want this to be really come across as like we want to know that this is what the congregation feels like we need. And so that's what we're trying to discern now. So all feedback is appreciated. Anything else?
I'll just say that, like, kind of what you're just saying, like, as far as, like, my perspective of, like, I think one of the surveys asked about how important we thought it was for this position to be brought in, and I feel like my perspective as somebody in the congregation is it's hard for me to gauge that because I don't know, like, how taxed is Pastor Chris, or how taxed are, like, we don't know some of those specifics. So I feel like I'm just reiterating support for those of you who are more involved in knowing those aspects. Like, we want to, as a congregation, support, the needs that are, happening. I can't formulate this sentence, but, and it's sometimes not obvious to us, how crucial things are. So we want to just be behind, if there's a crucial need, we want to support that. So.
Thanks, Jen. Okay. Is that a hand, John? Oh, okay. Don't want to cut anyone off. Really appreciate you guys taking the time. This is a great church. It's a privilege to serve it. I think I speak on behalf of all of council. Please keep us in your prayers this summer. I think we feel the weight of the decision, and so for discernment and guidance, unity, we would definitely covet those prayers. So I will close out our time together by praying, and we can go on our way. Gracious Heavenly Father, I thank you for brothers and sisters who are here and those who were not able to attend as well. We thank you for the family of the church. Lord, there's so much craziness going on in the world, so much turbulence, so much uncertainty. And we thank you for the grounding gift of worship, of gathering weekly as a family, fixing our eyes on Jesus, and worshiping, getting out of ourselves. Lord, we pray that you would go before this body, this church that you have called. We trust that you are the head and you will lead. We pray you give us wisdom and discernment as we think through additional staffing needs, as we think through ministry development, all these things, Lord. At the end of the day, may we love each other well. May we be united by the blood of Jesus and him alone. It's in his name that we pray. Amen. Thanks, everyone.